Genscape Land Viewer product suite. My name is Ken Copenhaver, and I'm going to be presenting today. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering with the Ag team at Genscape. If you have any questions, you can type them in on the viewer to the right, and we'll answer them after the webinar as they were turned in. Don't hesitate to ask anything. So a quick overview of the webinar today. We're going to be talking about the product suite we're offering this year, beginning with our crop consultants review, talking about the weekly report that we push to our clients via email, and then getting into the acres and yield forecast that'll be coming out first version here next week. I'll be presenting the Land Viewer web tool a little bit. We've got a few new products with that web tool that we're quite proud of that we'd like to present today. And then we're going to be talking about a couple of new products that we're generating, our ethanol storage and our ethanol production reports. Here's an overview of our product offerings. We do a planted acres and yield estimate that comes out twice a month from June through the end of September. It's based on satellite data and weather variables as well. And it's got a 10-year model. We'll get into a little more on the data set behind that yield estimation. We also have a web page that's available 24/7, of course, for clients to come on and look at weather maps, satellite-based vegetation indices, comparisons to previous years, and a new tool that we've released this year allows a 10-year analogous history comparison to look at this year and compare it to previous years, because everybody's always saying this reminds me of 2011 or 2008, and this gives you the opportunity to actually look that up and see how similar the years are, and see how similar the yields may be. Now, we've also added a basis pricing by location to our geospatial maps, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit when I show the web page. And again, talking about the weekly crop consultant report that I'll go into a little more detail about here shortly. That's delivered every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time to all of our clients. Looking at our information delivery schedule for this year, we'll be putting out a acreage estimate on June 27th. This will be combined with our first yield estimate, understanding that June 27th has its limitations on estimating yield, but we'll certainly put that out there to see where things are going. Again, our planted acres are using a combination of satellite and weather data to regress and try to estimate the percentage of acres that are planted in corn. Of course, we'll follow up with yield and production estimates every 2 weeks, as I said, until the end of September. And we'll try to put these out 3 or 4 days ahead of the USDA to give our clients an advantage in that respect. Here's an example of last week's weekly crop consultant report. We have a dozen crop consultants that are spread throughout the Corn Belt. Each of those blue circles in that map is a 50-mile radius around a crop consultant's hometown where they live. And we asked the crop consultants to write a paragraph about what conditions look like in their area, to give an estimate on the corn rating, similar to what USDA puts out every Monday afternoon, include pictures, and alert us if there's anything significant happening in their area. And as you can see from this report, things are certainly According to the crop consultants who have a combined average 22 years experience, things are looking really good out there so far this year. With that, we also put in our weekly report, we put out kind of a synopsis of what they've said. We also put out their paragraphs as they've written them that talk about what they've seen in their area. But in our weekly report, we put this little synopsis, the main things that they've seen in the area. For instance, last week there was some flooding in southwestern Illinois, and mostly it's good news, of course, that people are reporting at this time. Also, in our weekly geospatial report, we like to focus on topics of interest. A couple weeks ago, we put out some comparisons with on-farm storage and production last year. The on-farm storage product was coming from the USDA census data by county, and then we looked at corn production, soybean production last year, compared that to how much on-farm storage there was to give the clients an idea of how much corn may still be in the bins on the farm in their area. This week we looked at flooding. We looked at river stage data that's available from the National Weather Service, and there were some concerns among some of the clients that the flooding last week was more severe than it was, and we were able to show that it was peaking, but the forecast didn't see any significant flooding events. Now, getting into the yield and the acreage models. We started off the acreage model, and we'll be presenting this a week from today in our first call for the season on acreage yield and production. We look at May precipitation, which is often a good indication based on historical data as to how many acres can get planted. You know, of course, obviously, where you see that there's been heavier rains, there's been a reduced planting that's occurred, or even there's been planting, but it's had some drown-out areas. We look at nighttime surface temperature from satellite, which is often an indication of where corn's planted. Usually the soil is worked, so we're able to see that in the nighttime temperature. That soil has a different signature than soil that still has stubble on it or is left dormant. And then, of course, by mid-June, we're starting to see the corn, definitely seeing it this year. A lot of good emergence, a lot of strong vegetation signatures. We've already masked out the crop areas in the vegetation index, and now we're going to look for those crop areas that have the strongest signature to try to identify where corn is. And then finally, we break the U.S. into different zones based on their climate, their soils, obviously their latitude and their longitude, and we do the analysis within these zones to prevent these obvious effects of comparing corn planted in Missouri to corn planted in North Dakota, which are going to have very different signatures because of the growing degree days and the dates they were planted. We also, when appropriate, use higher resolution satellite imagery to zoom into areas. We've already got hundreds of areas identified by our consultants as fields that were planted with corn. They've sent us pictures. They've identified it with the GPS on their phone. We also get some higher resolution satellite imagery. Here we're looking at the rapid eye image is in the upper left. Rapid eye is a 5-meter resolution satellite with the near-infrared and visible bands. And here we've just highlighted corn with green. Dark purple and gray areas are bare soil. The image to the lower right is a Landsat 8 image. That's 30-meter resolution. It's actually free through the U.S. Geological Survey. but it only passes every 16, 17 days, and there's some cloud cover limitations there, obviously. But this is actually from last year, and you're looking at Moore and Olmsted counties in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. And actually here we're seeing those results of those heavy rains they got last year and those lower temperatures, primarily the heavy rains. And you can see the significant reduction in acreage that's showing up in Moore, Mitchell, Worth County. And something else that we put together for our clients earlier this year was a map that showed by county the FSA prevented acres. And obviously these counties had very high prevented acres last year. Our yield model for this year, we've made it more rigorous than last year. We've doubled the number of years from 5 years to 10 years. We've included soils information. We've included, again, breaking the areas into different agro-eco zones. So we're not comparing, again, North Carolina. We're not trying to develop a regression that's going to try to predict yield in North Carolina and apply that same regression to Nebraska or Minnesota. Each of these zones are broken out. We've added 2 new satellite data sets. In the past, we've had a normalized difference vegetation index, or an NDVI that probably a lot of people are familiar with. This year, we've added a leaf area index and the fraction of photosynthetic activity ratio to also help us better identify the yield for different counties. And here's just an example of the model and the different regression variables that go into it. We've kind of broken these out by Julian days because that's how the satellite people like to think about things. That way you don't have to worry about leap years and that sort of thing. But you can see there's a lot of variables that go into the model. A little more information on the model and the accuracy for the past 10 years. What we'll do next week when we present to the clients is we'll show them all the model results. We're very transparent with the model. We'll talk about whether the impact was a positive or a negative impact, whether precipitation had a positive influence on yield or a negative influence. We haven't started to use the satellite data yet because it doesn't make sense to use satellite data when the corn is this low to the ground. It's usually only after canopy closure that the satellite data becomes prevalent in the regression equations. Here's a look at our accuracy over the last 10 years in predicting total bushels versus the USDA, and we've typically been quite accurate. Here's an example of something else we did for our clients earlier in the year, not having any data sets of our own, but having the USDA data available to us. We looked at historical yields, historical planted to harvested acres, because we're trying to look at how many acres are harvested versus how many are planted. We looked at the USDA predictions for yield for this year and for production for this year. And we just kind of tried to figure out for the clients what areas are going to have to produce how much to meet this USDA objective, bearing in mind that the USDA starts off very optimistic. But again, just to give the clients a sense of this is where we're starting, this is our baseline. Now we're going to run the model and figure out, are these areas as successful as they've been in the past? Where are problem areas? We clip out the counties around a client's facility and deliver those in a separate report so they can get a good zoom in to their area. We release these maps. We predict harvested acres, yield, production. We will release these maps in a zoomable large PDF that the client can print out and put on the wall, or they can zoom in to different counties and be able to see specifically in that county what are the numbers. And again, our first prediction of planted acres is going to occur next week, and we'll release that next Friday. So I'm going to go ahead and escape out of here and open up our website. Our website is at landviewer.genscape.com. Anyone can register, and we often give free trials. Here is an example where we have precipitation for since October 1st of last year. So we're looking at precipitation since the beginning of the water year. On top of that, our cash price for all these different facilities in the United States. Green means that it's lower than the futures price by a certain deviation. Red means that it's higher than the futures price by a certain deviation. And yellow means it's somewhere in between those two. As you zoom in further, you will see the prices start to show up separately. If we had each price up there at this resolution, it would obviously be pretty confusing. The right viewer, and these viewers are attached. When you zoom in one, you zoom in the other. The right viewer just has a growth stage map that's based on growing degree days, as just sort of an estimate of where the corn crop would be if it was planted on May 1st. Here's an example of the different base maps we have available to clients. We have different precipitation maps. If someone wants to look at change from normal for the last 7 days to get a sense of whether vegetation is declining in their area, they can look at that and see based on this information whether they're above average or below average for the past 7 days, past 30 days. Here's the growth stage map. Growing degree days compared to the 10-year average growing degree days. Again, to get a sense for where are we at with degree days. Most of the country is above average currently. We have soil moisture, which is interesting to me in the fact that a lot of the Midwest right now is seeing soil moisture that's below average. We've had some good spring rains, but we didn't have a lot of rains late last year. So while things look good right now, compared to last year where we had a good soil moisture base, we don't have that this year. So if we do start to see some of the drought conditions, it could have a greater impact. But Genscape actually has a group of meteorologists that have specialized in long-term forecasting because their area of expertise is estimating power requirements for the power grid. And we release our meteorologist forecasts every week or every 2 weeks to give the clients a sense for where we think things are going, and we feel pretty strongly that it's better than a guess, that's for sure, what we're predicting, and I think our meteorologists right now feel pretty comfortable with where the precipitation is headed this year. And here's the charts that I mentioned earlier where you're able to go in, pick a county, a state, and it shows you the historical yield, and in this situation it's growing degree days. So you can look at, on your left, look at your growing degree days, zoom in to your area or an area you're interested in, whether it's Ohio or Nebraska, get a sense for where the growing degree days are, look at where they were in years past and how that impacted yield. So certainly by no means is it all conclusive, but it gives you something to go on that's maybe a little more accurate than just a guesstimate. So, and here's just some examples of that as well on the presentation. example of the vegetation index. We do, actually, let me go ahead and show the vegetation index on the web page. So here you've got, based on the vegetation information, a comparison to the past 5 years. And overall, things are looking pretty good right now. So again, you're free to register at our website to check out the maps and analytics. Take a look at the web tool. We'll verify that you were a webinar attendee and make sure that you get a demo period to take a look at things. Now getting into the new products we're offering this year. These are very close to a production release. Our ethanol production report uses natural gas nominations to predict what plants are in production, what ethanol plants are in production, and to what extent are they at full capacity, half capacity, etc. And that's based on 49 plants, and then 19 plants that share a nomination with other facilities. But obviously, with the amount of natural gas that ethanol plants use, this is typically the dominant user. This is just an example to the right of some nominations that were recorded since the first of the year at the Aventine Aurora West facility in Nebraska, and how we were able to pick up the fact that that plant started back up in late May, and it's actually producing with sugar beets. And it shows, it's also going to show as time goes on the efficiency of that plant and the efficiency of the use of the sugar beets versus corn and how many nominations they're requesting. You can plot the historical use of the nominations, so you can go back several months or further and be able to tell how often that plant was shut down, etc. Our ethanol storage report is still in development. Again, it's close to release. It's using thermal imagery to fly over ethanol storage tanks in Chicago and New York Harbor and detect how much ethanol is in those tanks. We know the tank capacity. We can use the thermal imagery. You can see in the lower right how clearly defined the tank fill is, and we're able to measure with a high degree of accuracy how much ethanol is in those tanks, and then report that to our clients so they have a sense for how much is in storage. So that's today's webinar. Here is the contact information for Dr. Stefan Mueller, who's our Senior Director for Crop Analytics. He would be your first point of contact for anyone interested in the product. Again, if you want to try out the web page, landviewer.genscape.com, and upper right to register. And certainly feel free to call with any questions. If anyone has any questions, type them into the question box, and I'd be more than happy to answer them. Okay, so I don't see any questions, so I guess we'll go ahead and wrap things up for today. I do encourage everyone to feel free to reach out to us at any time if you do have additional questions. So thank you very much.